Hello again. I hope all of you are doing well. Um, it's gotten to the point for me in the quarantine where my hair is just totally out of control, probably longer than it's ever been. I apologize for that. Please bear with me as far as that goes. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about our first two bigger assignments. We've had, our discussion posts and a couple of homework assignments, some essays, obviously. But I want to talk here about the narrative essay, which is one of our two major essays, and the descriptive assignment, which is one of the what I'm calling the small writing assignments. So let's talk about the narrative essay first. Let's start with just like it being a narrative essay, right? What does that mean? So one of the things about composition, right? We know there's different kinds of essays. In the past, I'm sure you've written a persuasive essay, maybe you've written a narrative essay, and then there's those other ones that they have you do like compare and contrast, and there's literary analysis where you write about a piece of fiction. There's all different kinds of essays, right? So a narrative essay specifically is a story, right? A narrative that sends a message, right? That has a very clear point, that kind of has a thesis, right? You're telling the story, the narrative, to prove a point, and that's the essay part. It's still an essay in that there's like a definite thing that you're trying to get across to the audience, but it's just that the way that you're going to try to make your point to them is by telling a story. So there's three things that you're going to need for this narrative essay. I would consider these things basically required. Your essay should have number one, dialogue, number two, descriptions or details, and number three, a clear message or takeaway. So I'm going to be asking you to write a personal story, right, from your own life. So let's start with the message or the takeaway. This is going to be kind of like the thesis for this. This is the point that you're going to be trying to prove. For this essay, since this is our first one, I'm going to give you more kind of freedom with the thesis for your next essay. But for this one, the message, I'm kind of giving you the message. The message for your story is going to have to do with language. It's going to be that language is more important or maybe more meaningful or powerful than people think. So that last part is important, right? Because, I'll pose it as a question. How important do you think your peers, for instance, think that language is? Do they think it's very important? Do they think it's not really important? Most students will generally tell me that they don't think it's important, especially if you've never taken a class like this or you've never read, like Vershawn Young's essay and some of the other essays that we're going to look at. Because that's what Vershawn Young tries to show us, right? Is that language and specifically like grammar, standard English, that it kind of does all these other things, that it's actually connected to things like politics and things like economics when we talk about who gets jobs and who doesn't and stuff like that, right? So what he's showing you in his essay is that language is important or meaningful in a way that people don't really think about. Like if I would have asked everyone, at the very beginning, is it possible that grammar is in any way racist or something like that? We would have said, no, of course not. It's grammar. How could it be racist? But then you read his essay and you kind of see, oh, well, maybe there's more going on here than I thought. So this also gets to the point of audience. When I say that the message should be that language is more important than people think, different essays have different audiences. We're going to read an essay about audience maybe next week. But I'll just say for now that I think for most of us, we probably have always thought about the teacher as our audience, right? If we're writing for a grade, we're writing for the teacher. But I don't actually think that's the best way to approach things. Because when you're trying to write for a teacher, you're just trying to give them what you want, what they want, what you think they want, not necessarily what you think is the best writing or how you want to say it or you think is the best way to say it. You're trying to give them what they want, right? That's why throughout school we feel like we have to use fancy vocabulary words and things like that, words we might not even understand, right? So I'm going to ask you for our whole class, since this is kind of an introduction to writing class. I'm going to ask you to think about your audience as your peers, as other people who go to UCC, other freshmen college students, people in their first year, however old you might be. Think about it as if you're writing for your peers. So how does that change things? I think going back to the conversation we had about like what counts as academic writing, if you're writing for your peers, then I think dialect can be appropriate, right? I want you guys to feel like you have the freedom to write more similar to how you talk. One of my goals really for this class is to help students kind of knock down the barriers between the ways that they talk and the ways that they think and the ways that they write. Because that's the one thing students will always say is like, I have it in my head, but I can't get it on the paper. So I think if we take out, these kind of things that get in the way, like vocabulary and worrying about the teacher and all this stuff, then we can be able to get our thoughts down more clearly. And that's kind of the first step to becoming a better writer. That's how we become better writers. It starts by being clear, saying things how we want to say them and how we think is the best way to say them. So yeah, think about the standard approach to language that someone your age might have. Um, and again, I very much agree with Vershawn Young and everything he says in that essay in terms of using dialect and it being appropriate. So feel free to curse, to write the way that you talk, things like that. Last thing on audience for this essay. Um, since I think the standard position that most people have is that language really doesn't matter at all, basically, or very little. I'm not asking you, or I'm not even trying to say that language is the most important thing in the world, that it's, what our main number one focus should be. But I do think it is important and has more value than people think. So I'm not asking you to, make it seem like it's the only thing we should care about, but I think you should be trying to show your audience this is more important than you probably think. So that's kind of how I would be framing it. Okay, now let's talk about dialogue. Dialogue can be tough, it can be tricky. You kind of just want to run through in your head, especially if you're using a story, that actually happened to you. If you can run through in your memory and just try to remember what people said, or just, try to make it sound realistic as much as you can. You kind of got to play out the scene in your head a little bit. It's tough, but we're gonna give it a shot. In terms of the formatting, you want to have quotation marks right around any dialogue. Make sure it's clear to the audience, who's saying it. Uh, Try to use some words other than just said, right? Try to get a little creative with the verbs that you use along with the dialogue. Obviously said, but you might want to think about if it makes sense to use things like yelled, whispered, commanded, threatened, whatever, said nicely, even, changing the way that they said it. As specific as you can be is going to make it more interesting for the reader. Another thing about using dialogue, I know sometimes when we read novels, they'll like skip a whole paragraph for like the piece of dialogue and then do another one. We don't need to do that for this. I'm only asking you for a few pages, so it would make it very long. It'd be an easy way for you to get the length. So you can just put the dialogue right in the same paragraph. You don't need to skip a paragraph and start a new one. Just make sure you have the quotation marks, and that'll work. So the other third requirement that I mentioned was descriptions or details. So this really has to do with telling the story in a way where you really can kind of put the reader there, right? You want them to be able to see in their head what's going on. So the best way to do this is to describe things in terms of our senses, right? So for whatever scene you're in your story, you want to think about what would you be seeing right now? What would you be hearing? What would you be smelling? What would you be feeling? Even feeling emotionally? Touching? I mean, I don't know, maybe. But you want to think in terms of all of those. You want to give the sensory experience of being in the place where the action is happening in your story. So that's one of the main things that a narrative does is draw the reader in like that. And I think it's an important thing because I think it makes it a little more engaging, right? Uh, you care more because you're invested in the story. Um, and then, it might also make you more receptive to the message if you're caring more in that way. So you want to make sure that you have a lot of descriptions, like what people are wearing, what they look like, what you're seeing. The way I always talk about it, you want to make sure that you're like zooming in on one or two or three main scenes. I'm only asking for the essay to be, I think, 3 pages. So you're not gonna have that many scenes, right? But you should probably have one, two, three, maybe four scenes where you're really zooming in, right? And you can give us kind of the full experience to make it an engaging story. So those are the basic requirements. Again, with the biggest one being that the story needs to show us why language is important. And there's a couple of different reasons why language is important that we're going to kind of go through as we read our essays. So the way that I'm going to be doing the class is that we kind of have the content, the stuff that is going to like, be the meat for what we're writing about in our essays. In this case, it's all the theories about language and stuff. And then we have the stuff about writing itself. The video I did about the writing process. I'm doing a video now about making an outline. So those are kind of on one hand. So all of the essays, you should be thinking about ways that they can help you with the essay that you're going to write. For this first essay, I'm not requiring you to cite any of them or include any quotes from the essays that we're reading. But the reason that I'm having you read all these essays is because I think that it's going to make it easier for you to write your own essay. So what we've seen so far, if we're asking the question, why is language important? One answer that we've gotten to it is from Vershawn Young. And I think we can summarize his answer to that question by saying, for him, language is important because it can lead to unfair treatment, right? It can contribute to certain groups being oppressed, certain groups getting to rise in society, all the things we talked about in that discussion. Um, so that's one answer, right? That's why language is more important than you might think, because it can contribute to discrimination and unfair treatment and stuff like that. As we go through some of our other essays, there will be other reasons that will kind of tack on to that list. So what you need to do is think of some kind of story from your own life, or someone that you know or whatever, a story that you know that kind of fits into one of these categories. So, like for the first Sean Young thing, if you ever, I don't know, like had a job interview and felt like you didn't get the job because of the way that you talk, or if you have ever like felt that you had problems in school because of the way that you talk, or like if you ever got in trouble for like using some kind of slang or something like that, or if people ever told you that it's uneducated or unprofessional or any of those things, even if you wanted to get into like the way that we were all drilled with like grammar lessons when we were in like second grade, and how we can kind of see how that connects to standard language and then the whole thing with Vershawn Young and Stanley Fitch. Any of those could be stories that you tell to prove this point that language is maybe more important than people tend to think. Okay, so I think it's normal to hear me explain it this way and not really know what story you have that could fit into this. Some people will have personal stories like this, some people won't. If you don't really have a personal story, there's also things you can think about, like things you saw in the news or anything like that. So I have a couple of examples that are like things that I would possibly use if I was writing an essay like this. The first one is related to sports, so forgive me for that. So this example, this goes back a couple of years ago. This is getting dated. I need to find some new stuff. But I don't know if anybody might remember this, but this is a couple of years ago with the New York Knicks. So this was back when they had Phil Jackson, the former coach, was working for the Knicks, right? He was like their general manager or whatever. So this was back when people thought that there was a chance that LeBron James was going to go to the Knicks, which is kind of hilarious looking back on it. But at the time, Phil Jackson, so he was trying to say something about LeBron James and like his business partners or whatever, like his agent and his like business people that are involved with him, his associates or whatever, right? So Phil Jackson was trying to say something about these people. I don't remember what, but he was trying to refer to them. And the term that he used, he said LeBron James and his posse. He used the term posse. And I remember at the time it became a story because like LeBron got mad about it and like posted on the internet that like he was pissed. So I'll ask you the question, and think about this maybe before you continue watching. Why do you think LeBron got mad about that? Like why might the term posse when you're referring to a group of agents and business people? Why might that be something that you get mad at, or like what's the connect, like what's the connotation there? And that's an important way to think about this, and this is another thing we'll talk about. But when you talk about language, you have the denotation of a word and you have the connotation of the word. The denotation is like the dictionary definition, right? If you looked it up in the dictionary, what would it say? The connotation is more of like what the word is associated with or what it brings to mind, right? So the connotation of the word posse, I think, is, it's not a far leap from posse, to gang. Um, it just sounds like people who are like lawless or something, or breaking the law, or doing something that's unofficial or in some way wrong, and I think especially when it's a old white man talking about a younger black man, and he's using a term that can so easily be linked to like gangs, and the term like thug comes to mind. So, and that's why LeBron got mad. That's what he said. So this is an example of something where like just like a word choice, right? This would be another one. If one reason language is important, was because of its possible link to discrimination and unfair treatment. Another one would be the way that word choice can like affect the message that you're sending. Like the fact that Phil Jackson said posse instead of just business team, made it totally different, a whole different spin on everything. So that would be an example. If I was going to do this, I could tell the story of like me watching ESPN, right? And I could say, okay, whatever. I just got home from work from a long day, and I like get some food, and I'm sitting down to eat some Chinese food, and I turn on ESPN, and they're talking about the story about LeBron James, and the anchor says this, and they put in quotation marks, Phil Jackson today said something about LeBron James, and then I could go on and explain the whole kind of thing about posse and how it shows that like language is, does things that maybe we don't think about, or is more important than we thought it was. And that would be the message of my story. So even if you don't have something that happened to you directly, it could be something that happened to somebody you know. You could ask, your family or whatever, or even something that you just heard about, and you can kind of just narrate. I think a good way to think about this essay is kind of trying to take us to like a moment of realization, something that makes you realize like, oh wow, like language is like doing this thing that I didn't think it could, or most people wouldn't think that it could. Anything that shows the audience language may be more important than you thought. So as long as you have that message, and then you have these other storytelling elements of the dialogue and details and everything, I think we'll end up with a successful essay here. I know this is confusing. I know it's confusing. I'm trying to make it interesting, and to make things interesting and worthwhile, and to have a reason to write this, right? Because I think I talked about this a little bit in the Why We Hate English thread. So many of the essays we felt there was no point to them, right? This essay I think has a point. I think because of the stakes of whether or not we think language matters or not, like we saw with Bertrand Young, we'll see with the others. So there's a reason to write an essay like this. There's a reason that it matters if people are convinced by it or not. So I hope that is worth it, even though it's a little bit confusing. So send me questions about this, and I'll be happy to answer them. I'll try to give you any more information that I can on it. But I think that's kind of what we're looking for the narrative essay. So that's due. So for that, we have the outline due on Wednesday. We have a rough draft due on Friday. We have the final draft due next Friday. So send me any questions about that as soon as you can, and we're going to talk a lot more about that the next couple of weeks. Okay, so briefly, the other thing I wanted to touch on was the descriptive assignment. That is due this Friday. This is a small writing assignment. It's not a formal essay. It doesn't need an introduction and conclusion. It's more of like a writing exercise, is like a better way to think about it. It's shorter, it's only like 500 words. So it's something you should do pretty quick. So what I have there, the descriptive assignment asks you to describe a place that you associate with your childhood. So just like I was talking about the details and the descriptions for the narrative essay, this descriptive assignment is kind of designed to help you along with that, to help you get into to get some practice with descriptive writing so that you can then use it in your narrative essay as well. So what I'm looking for here is, since the whole thing is just for you to describe a place, I really want you to try to like transport the reader to that place. So again, in terms of senses, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? Whatever, taste, touch, if those apply. You want to give them like the full experience, not just the sensory stuff, yes, that, but also I want you to try to embed it with some kind of with like your emotional feeling about this place. So this kind of comes down to word choice, right? Like I was just talking about, the words that we use have different connotations. So you want to think like, does the words that you're using, do they give off, kind of a dark vibe? I think vibe is the correct way to think about it. The words that you're choosing, are you trying to give off like a happy vibe, a light vibe, a fun vibe, or are you trying to give off some kind of like dark, brooding vibe? It depends on the place that you're describing. Is your childhood room a good place that you like a lot, and that you have positive memories with, or was it a bad time in your life and it's negative associations with? You want to try to give your words some of that emotional weight as well, because that's how you're really going to make the reader feel like they're there. They're going to feel like they're experiencing this place through you, through your experience of that place. So yeah, I would try to work off memory with this. And like I said, it's just a writing exercise. It's pretty short. So have fun with it. Try out, some different stuff. I think it should be good. So again, send me any questions that you have with that one too. All right, I think I'm gonna end this video. It's already gone longer than I wanted it to. Um, and yeah, so make sure that you know what's going on with these assignments, that you've read the assignment sheets, and that you know what I'm asking for. And if you don't know, just reach out and I'll be happy to answer any questions. All right, talk to you soon.